Hello everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher, ordained minister, and certified Kilobi inquiries facilitator. I'm here today to share with you a little bit about radical non-duality and also the fundamental ground of being. I don't want this talk to be too long, so we'll see how much I get through, but those are kind of the topics that I wanted to cover. Before I do that, I do want to thank all my patrons on Patreon. They make these talks possible by supporting me financially. I also want to thank those of you who make one-time donations via PayPal and Venmo, and also those of you that support me on YouTube by giving me the thumbs up, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. So thank you all. You really keep this work alive. All right. So today's topic is going to be radical non-duality and the fundamental ground of being. We'll see, that's a lot to get through potentially, but the reason I'm covering this, as some of you know, I've been lately interested quite a bit in manifestation, and I recently came across some teachings and teachers that overlap a lot with what I teach about spirituality. Before this point, manifestation, to me, while it might have been metaphysical, it didn't necessarily feel spiritual in that it didn't really, from my perspective, point to a fundamental realization of self. At least that was my perception of it. But more recently, I began to find that that may not be true, at least in some corners of the manifestation community. So I've been interested in it, and I've been studying it, and I'm starting to share a little bit about it. So I thought I would start with this very baseline teaching. Now, again, like anything else, like spirituality, it's not like all spiritual teachers agree or have the same conception of, say, enlightenment or the fundamental ground or anything. So if you've been studying manifestation and I say something that contradicts what your teacher says or your understanding, that's par for the course. So I think there might be as many different ways of understanding these concepts as there are people or teachers, so that shouldn't be surprising. What I'm here today is to share what I've learned with you in the hopes that that will be valuable for you. So there's an overlap in spirituality and in manifestation that's very interesting. The manifestation teachings that I've been studying, they are based on a very deep spiritual realization that is at the core of my teaching, which is radical non-duality. So this has been stated from the perspective of A Course in Miracles as it's a very simple statement, but quite profound, and there's a lot in it. So just listening to me say it and then nodding your head or shaking your head doesn't really get to the core of what we're talking about. It really requires a kind of a sit down and to go through really what the implications are. So the statement is God is. This is the ultimate statement of truth from the perspective of radical non-duality. God is. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is everything else that we're seeing is some kind of a phantasm. It's some kind of an illusion. It's not really real because the only thing in existence is this one, I can't even call it a substance, this one beingness called God. Again, this would include our own self-conception because many of us feel like we are separate from God. And again, if that's what you believe, I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong. that is called duality. So if we think we are separate from God, we are separate from spirit, we are separate from enlightenment, we are separate from anything, then we're living in a dualistic universe. Okay, we think that there's matter and spirit, or God and sinners, or however we want to conceive of it. We are seeing things from a dualistic lens. Now, dualism exists in Christianity, it exists in yoga teachings, it exists everywhere. But non-duality and radical non-duality also exist within these teachings. So again, Buddhism, the yoga tradition, Christianity, I suspect Islam, Judaism, they all will have branches. So this isn't like, oh, I'm teaching radical non-duality and that only is specific to A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles is a radical non-dual text, but so are Zen texts. You know, there again are plenty of examples of this. So within each tradition, you will likely find both. So I don't want you to confuse radical non-duality with a specific tradition, because every tradition will likely, if you dive deep enough, you will likely find a group that are practicing and working through the lens of radical non-duality. That's what I like to teach. Now, contained within radical non-duality is dualism. So a radical non-dual teacher might still refer to things in a dualistic way because it can be useful or beneficial, or just makes sense in certain respects to talk in dualistic terms. And if you are truly serving your community and your students, sometimes insisting on having a dialogue in a radical non-dual way actually is harmful or not helpful at all. Some people will need to first see things through a dualistic lens before they are ready to transition to a non-dual lens. And I will say this, it usually almost always works in that order. So it might sound like I'm talking a little bit hierarchical, and maybe I am, but this is generally the way it works. People, I don't think I've ever heard of anybody going from a dualistic perspective or from a non-dual perspective to a dualistic perspective. It's almost always the other way around. People might start with a dualistic me and God type experience and worldview, and then over time they have a deeper realization of truth, and then that separation between themselves and God disappears. So somebody like Meister Eckhart, if you read his teachings, you can see how he's diving deeper and deeper into the Godhead, and he says things like, the eye through which I see God is the same eye that sees me, or something along those lines. This is a very non-dual, radical non-dual statement where you're basically collapsing the separation between self and other. So again, one way of expressing this is God is. So if I see a sinner, they are God. If I see myself, I am God. If I see a tree or a bush or whatever it is, this is all ultimately an extension or expression of God. Okay, that's a kind of a radical non-dual perspective. And this can be used in many, many ways on a spiritual path, so we can begin trying to cultivate love for all things in an attempt to love God. Okay, so again, challenging practice? Absolutely. Because the ego will constantly separate things, and it will separate things into categories like good or bad or spiritual, not spiritual. And what you're invited to do with this teaching is break down those distinctions, because it's you're operating on a deeper level of truth where that separation, you're trying to see through that illusion of separation. Again, I'm not telling you what to believe or think. I'm just simply sharing this perspective. So what's been interesting to me is this teaching is actually showing up in manifestation. And that some people are saying that really the only way you are going to make manifestation work long time and in a satisfying way is you need to collapse this distinction between self and other, God and self. It's quite radical, to be honest with you. So I'm kind of surprised because I think while I've always had sort of an interest in manifestation, a lot of the communities and teachings I came across seemed very, for lack of a better way of putting it, seemed to lack depth. They didn't seem to ask us to really radically transform our conception of self. It seemed to be something along the lines of, well, just feel better, feel good, focus on things that you like, and you'll get all the stuff you want, which sounds great, but it also sounds like a program that the ego very easily can get on board with. Basically, oh, I focus on what I like and I get more of what I like. Okay. Again, no criticism. I'm not trying to put anybody down or burst anyone's bubble or say that it doesn't work. I'm simply giving you my perception of it. It didn't really seem to align with spiritual teaching. It didn't seem to have much to do with it. Whereas the manifestation communities and teachings that I've been studying lately have that challenging aspect of asking us to, again, reconsider our sense of self. So at its most radical form, it's actually saying that the self that you actually are at your core is one and the same with God, what we would call God. And again, God is being used to describe the one being or one substance or one thing that is in existence in radical non-duality. So a lot of people hear God and they start thinking of an old man with a beard. They start thinking of somebody who is sitting at the gates of heaven, who's judging us. They think of basically a personification of a person, a wise, loving person, but who maybe also is really judgmental if you're not doing what that being wants you to do. Again, everyone's conception is going to be different. But in radical non-duality, again, it's basically saying that whatever is this thing that we call God. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And that's what makes it such a challenging teaching, but also so transformative if we can understand it. So what I've been discovering is there are different levels of working with this and understanding this. We can understand it on one level and feel or sense that we have a certain level of influence. But with manifestation, it's really inviting you to take that statement very literally, in a sense, and explore how your own thoughts and beliefs actually will shape what you call the outside world. Now, the core of that teaching, again, is that you are, at your core, no different than the I am of divine being. So in many spiritual traditions and teachings, including in yoga, this can be found in Soham, I am. I am is a statement of being. What we say after I am, you could say is ego. But before the I am itself is a statement of truth. So whatever it is you're doing, whatever it is you are being, you are, right? You have to be something. And so this is a very fundamental truth, that there's something there that is being. And that being is, according to these non-dual teachings, the very same being as, you could say, God or divinity or the ultimate self, the big self. And this can be found in Buddhism and yoga in different forms, this teaching. So again, this isn't unique to the manifestation community. Rather, I think the manifestation community takes this radical teaching and, you could say, builds on it. And so that's where I feel I am in my journey, is I have a long history, many, many years of studying in these mostly Asian traditions of non-duality. Also some modern traditions like A Course in Miracles, which is based in Christian teaching. And I'm very familiar with that. But you could say the manifestation teaching that I'm studying takes that and then goes a step further in terms of what's possible or what the meaning of that is for you as an individual or in your own personal experience. So I'm not really ready to share about that part of the journey yet, partly because I feel like I'm still learning it myself. Of course, the Miracles teaches that the best way to learn is to actually teach. So I am beginning to share with you what I'm learning. However, I'm going to share in a sort of very measured, slow, gradual way as I grasp the concepts. So again, the first concept here, the base of all of this, is this radical non-duality, that the power that created everything that I see is actually inside of me, and I actually have access to it. In fact, manifestation, at least again, some schools of manifestation will say that you are manifesting all the time and that you manifested everything in your experience ultimately. This can be a very triggering statement for many people, because some people will say, well, I was abused, or I was mistreated, or I don't like this, this, and this. I didn't manifest that. Why would I manifest that? I didn't like that. No one that I'm aware of is saying you manifest what you want. They're just saying that you manifest. So please be clear on that. No one is saying that you manifest only what you want. And that's sort of the point of manifestation. If the statement is true that our beliefs, our thoughts, our assumptions create the reality we live in, well then those sorts of beliefs, thoughts, and assumptions are creating both the wanted and the unwanted. As far as I can tell, if we really embrace this philosophy, this will require a lot of mental discipline because we need to start really monitoring our thoughts. I've known for a very, very long time that having undisciplined thinking is not really good for us spiritually or as individuals. That on the very least, it is going to demoralize us, and it's going to affect how we feel emotionally, which affects our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health. And so we need to monitor our thoughts. I've known this for a very, very long time, and I've been practicing it. But again, this is where I feel like manifestation, as I'm learning, if it is accurate, then it's taking this idea to another level, which is why it's an edge for me. What if we really can shape our reality on a radical level if we're only aware of how we are thinking and talking to ourselves and believing about ourselves, reality, and other people? If we become aware of that and we are able to alter or change that, perhaps we can create radical change in our experience. I don't know yet, because again, it's something that I am just learning about and playing around with. So stay tuned, and we'll see what happens as we progress. So the important thing to understand about spiritual teachings, and definitely with manifestation, is these cannot stay or be simply conceptual statements. They will not be transformative. They will not help you in any way. These must be, while they can start as a concept, it's nothing wrong with understanding conceptually, it needs to be something that is integrated, lived, and learned. And you could say your body, it has to be embodied. So your body actually has to respond in the right way. And this is the thing about a lot of these teachings, is that first the body will not be in agreement. You could say, I think Joe Dispenza talks about heart-mind coherence. So this is where we'll see a conflict there. You can affirm to yourself, I am God, all is God, whatever it is, but the body will be responding as though there is separation. So whether we are trying to manifest something or we're trying to have a deep spiritual realization, this is true either way. So what can you do if you do not feel you're living this truth? And again, I'm not telling you you should, but if this appeals to you, if you want to experience that realization, then you will need to have that experience, not just the conception of it. So one of the best ways that I've found is what's called direct pointing. And this is something that you do with a knowledgeable teacher. I can help you with it, but there are other teachers who can do it as well. They just have to understand non-dual principles in a very, they have to have a good grasp on these non-dual principles and have experienced them themselves. When they have, then they can help point you to the truth. Now, like anything else, a teacher might be able to help many, many people, but not be able to help you for whatever reason. And that's just the way that it goes. We sometimes are just able to hear certain people's words and understand certain people better than others. But I've definitely helped many people with this direct pointing. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to reach out to me and we can set up a private session where we spend some time doing that. Many people benefit by doing a few sessions actually, because very often when the first seeing is experienced, there can be many questions that arise as a result and things that are not completely cleared up. But regardless, even one session can really begin the ball rolling. And like with anything else, we might have an initial seeing conception, and then there can be some cloudiness that comes in, some confusion. And for many people, this is a process that unravels over time, sometimes even an entire lifetime. And it isn't an all or nothing realization, at least in my experience. We can see it in certain areas of our life, and then we might find that we have Velcro in other areas where we're stuck and we're not really able to shake the egoic perspective. And what's very fascinating is this is what will show up in our manifestations according to the manifestation community. If we have a limitation, an egoic limitation, where we have a self-conception that isn't fully realized or true, then we will keep manifesting unintentionally, again, things that we are not wanting to experience. So this is why people can have a very seemingly legitimate experience of being a victim, of constantly being victimized by other people not treating them right, and it, from their perspective, seems absolutely 100% out there. But what this teaching is inviting us to understand, and what we do when we do direct pointing, is we realize there's no out there. There's nobody else. I think it was Ramana Maharshi when he was asked, well, what about others? And he said, there are no others. What others? So again, this is something that's very hard for most of us to grasp or agree with from our standard egoic perspective. And that's why these teachings can be so radical and invite us to take such a big step outside of our usual perspective. And this is what's so exciting about it. It really promises a very different experience of life as we know it. All right, everyone, I want to thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'm happy to speak with you about any of this. Again, if you'd like to set up some private sessions, reach out and we can talk about your options there. Otherwise, until next time, namaste and have a beautiful, beautiful day.